Today's video is all about the best PvE, or player versus environment, weapon in Albion Online. What is it? Why is it the best? How do you make it the best? What is its use? What do you mean PvE? How is it the best? Let's talk about it. The old best weapon was the Shadow Caller. Is it still number one? Let's find out. But for those that don't know these terms, what is PvE? It means fighting monsters, fighting NPCs, fighting animals, creatures, monsters, bosses. It means being able to solo group content like group dungeons and static areas meant for groups, being able to do it completely by yourself if you have the item power, gear quality, etc. So how do you determine the best weapon for this activity? Well, the highest DPS, or damage per second. The highest sustain, as in, can it heal you? Can it make you defensive? Can you withstand multiple attacks from multiple targets almost indefinitely? The quickest clear speed, and how fast can you clear a dungeon? How fast can you kill the mobs? How fast can you clear a static area? The highest overall single and group DPS, and usefulness in different PvE environments. First off, let's talk DPS. Now, I'm not talking about hardcore expeditions, that's an entire different ballgame. So if you're looking for hardcore expedition info, you'll have to look elsewhere. I'm purely focusing on soloing group dungeons and soloing statics. And so the items that we'll be using for the DPS, we're going to leave the cape out because the cape differs depending on the weapon you use. But essentially, for the highest single target mob DPS in the game, you're using a cultist cowl, because this thing just hits a mob like a massive truck with a ton of damage. The second best thing for AoE would be a Purity Cowl, which shoots a laser beam, not as strong, but it can hit multiple enemies and interrupt them. So it really depends. You can swap them in and out if you're, clearing the dungeon, and when you get to the boss, you can swap on the cultist if you want. Next up is the Stalker Jacket. Out of all the armors in the game, even though this has been nerfed as of the recent patch, it is still the highest DPS chest piece in the game, except for OneHanded Dagger. That changes things. But for everything else, just activating Electric Field dramatically increases your DPS for the fight. Next up is Boots. The highest DPS boot is the Cultist Sandals because it lowers the enemy resistances, meaning that they receive more damage from all other sources. Finally, for offhands, the highest DPS offhand in the entire game is the Crypt Candle. There is no offhand that gives you more damage than this. The trade-off is that it lowers your defense, which kind of sucks, but once you have enough gear and sustain, you don't need defense, you only need more offense. Also, in order to sustain yourself in statics and group content, you will need a roast pork. This gives you lifesteal. The higher, the better. You can also use a Pure Mist Snapper, which gives you a % maximum life increase and lifesteal, but not nearly as much lifesteal. For the DPS rankings, we took a 10,000 HP target, and we recorded the DPS once the HP reached 0. So this differentiates sustained weapons versus burst weapons and so on, because when you're fighting group dungeon enemies, they almost always have over 10,000 HP, especially when upgraded. Statics are maybe an exception, they might have a bit less. Some easier group dungeon enemies will have around 5 to 6k HP. But this is a pretty good test to determine DPS. So the One-Handed Dagger, it lacks AoE, but I kept it in here anyway at 1604 DPS, the highest DPS weapon in the game against a single target, and it has healing capabilities. The Demon Fang had the second highest AoE attack DPS. However, the Demon Fang does hurt you massively by over 1,000 HP when you use it. The Light Crossbow came in third at 1240. This is the hardcore expedition weapon everyone tends to use. The Shadow Caller came in fourth. Now, the Shadow Caller is the king of sustain. Out of all these weapons, it is the number one at sustaining your life. Now, of course, there's a Werewolf Staff, which is not shown on here, which actually has better sustain against single target, but it has way less damage, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The Imp Staff had one less DPS than the Shadow Caller, but the Imp Staff makes you squishy because when you are in Imp form, you are counted as wearing cloth armor. Actually, you're counted as wearing less armor than cloth, technically, if you look at the numbers, but it's not by much. The Blazing Staff then follows the Imp Staff. Spirit Hunter is up there. Spirit Hunter is very surprisingly good. Fire Staff is next. Nature Staff and with the ability to heal yourself by around 400 at max spec 8.4. Not too terrible. A druidic staff would do slightly less damage than this, maybe around 8 to 900 DPS, but it would have double the healing. So keep that in mind. The Avian Bird was 1007, and the Prowler staff was 856. So again, Prowler, pretty good single target DPS. The Prowler specializes in sticking to a target and not letting it escape, whereas the One-Handed Dagger can kind of do that and have double the DPS. So why would you use a Prowler staff ever? I don't know. The Realmbreaker, which is people think is really good, actually kind of sucks. Half the damage as the top 4. And Earthsign Maulers, which is a fan favorite for clearing Nightfall Abbeys, clearing, just open world mobs, clearing any kind of thing that you group up and just nuke down. Came in at 589 against group dungeon mobs and statics. So that is not a static or group dungeon weapon at all. So One-Handed Dagger is not the best, but it can counter a few bosses that the other weapons simply can't do. Now, the Werewolf Staff might be able to do the Earth Mommy, though in testing, no one I know has been able to beat her with just purely pianoing the buttons. So, but with One-Handed Dagger, when she starts doing stun punches, you can self-heal to full and DPS her down before she gets a second stun punch in. Therefore, you can beat that fight. Arthos, you have to. It becomes a DPS race when he gets low health. You have to save your cooldowns, and as soon as his auto-regeneration kicks in, you have to go full burst mode to take him down. And finally, the old lady that does the tidal waves, she also has a self-heal that summons wisps. You can beat her with a One-Handed Dagger. Now, this loses to the Sword Morgana lady, who will just kill you massively if you get close to her. The undeads that have the AoE Spectral Jacket spell, especially the legendary ones. Now, you can beat the, lesser than legendary ones with One-Handed Dagger. Those are fine. And also, any kiteable boss that auto-attacks way too hard. There's a few in the Heretic dungeons. I don't remember their name, but they can be a real pain in the butt for One-Handed Dagger, because One-Handed Dagger, when it's on cooldown, it is just a dead weapon. The DPS starts really lacking, but it is the burstiest weapon for single target. The Demon Fang, the self-wound hits you way too hard. It takes like 1/3 to 1/4 of your life, even at maximum spec 8.4. There's no sustain, even if you were to, say, attune it, or, imbue it, upgrade it, whatever you want to call it, to give it lifesteal. It doesn't help enough. It's just bad. Even like if you upgrade this here, like what is this called? The Attunement thing, the Awakening Weapons. It still sucks. I tried all of these with Awakening mods, and there was like barely any upgrades. So avoid the Demon Fang. The Light Crossbow, it does have fast clears if you do little baby pulls, but it cannot do big pulls. So you could use this in, say, a group dungeon just fine. However, when doing statics and trying to pull like 10 mobs at once, it simply will not work due to the lack of sustain. Even if you give it lifesteal up to like 10%, which would cost you multiple hundreds of millions of silver on an 8.4, it doesn't give you enough life back to sustain, so you will still be downed by big pulls. Shadowcaller is still the king. It is still the best sustain weapon and the highest DPS. Now, I want to talk about attuning this thing, because I tried everything to see what was the best attunement. If you gave it 12 ability power, or 12% ability power rather, which costs hundreds of millions of silver and hundreds of hours of grinding, you get a tiny little boost of like 36 DPS. Remember, it starts at 1208 DPS, so now it's 1244, which is garbage. Plus 90 item power brought it to 1257 instead of 1208, so again, that's 49 more DPS, which is nothing. It's completely unnoticeable. 6% lifesteal on this bad boy, which you can get it to 12%, but even at 6%, right? That's twice as strong as a roast pork 0.3 enchanted. You don't notice it. You don't notice having it. There's no difference, really. 10% cooldown reduction, also hundreds of millions of silver. It only made the E come back 3 seconds sooner, which I guess could save your life, but you shouldn't be relying on a second E ever. Nothing lives past for you need to be able to cast E again twice in a fight, except a few bosses, and even then, you know, using the E-spell on a boss isn't the best thing. I just usually switch to One-Handed Dagger to nuke bosses. Maximum life was pretty good, actually. It doesn't make a difference in clear speed, though, and we don't die, so it really doesn't matter. But it doesn't suddenly open up the ability to kill different bosses. It's okay if you just want more of a safety net, and it works pretty good with Pyramid Snapper, pushing your health well over 5,000, which is really fun to have. And defense versus all, completely unnoticeable. I still could not do massive super pulls with or without it. It didn't matter. Healing received did not affect lifesteal or the E-spell, so it's a useless dead talent. There is nothing you need. You don't need energy regeneration or anything on the Shadowcaller. You don't need to awaken it. It would be a complete waste of your money to awaken it. But if you had to pick one, lifesteal, cooldown reduction, or max life. So the Imp Staff is actually great for non-group content, it's the fastest, actually, for Corrupted Dungeons and solo dungeons. However, in the current patch, in the current timeline of the game, solo dungeons are pointless to ever do, even mapped ones. Corrupted Dungeons are pointless to do, and I guess you could maybe write with this. You're squishy in Imp form. For group and statics, you're too squishy. You can't tank all the hits, you can't do big pulls, and it's just awkward to use, and also, you do less damage than Shadowcaller, and you have none of the sustain, so why use this? The Blazing Staff is actually the king of open world farming the Nightfall Abbey and the Mist Camps. You just pull a massive group, and then you Flame Tornado and dump all your spells, and everything dies. You know, just one cooldown, one rotation, you're donezo. Does more damage than the, the punching one. I forget the damn, whatever it's called. The Earthsign Maulers. Now, with lifesteal, this thing's pretty damn good. It's pretty close to a Shadowcaller, but just longer cooldown and less sustain. But you would have to have attuned it with 10% lifesteal to really notice. So the Spirit Hunter, it's massive, massive damage and armor shred. However, I'd say it's great for co-op if you got friends and one of your friends wants to bring Spirit Hunter for group dungeons. Absolutely. I would love a Spirit Hunter in my groups. But once your spells are on cooldown, you're kind of weak. So, fighting bosses is not really a thing. You don't have sustain with this. If you awaken it with lifesteal, it can work, but it's such a long cooldown. It's okay. It's not the best. The Fire Staff did really well with smaller pools, but not the big pools. It's actually very strong against bosses as well, and if you have the lifesteal attunement, you can really feel it. It is night and day. It is. I think it's bugged. I feel like the Fire Staff is bugged with how lifesteal works with it for the attunements, not the food. The food works fine, but when you have it attuned with lifesteal, lifesteal's a little too much. You can basically full heal from a few spells. It's kind of weird, but you can't pull as many enemies as the Shadowcaller. So the Nature Staff, which you should be using Druidic for real, because the heal is way better. The Sustain is kind of weak. Now, the Druidic, the Sustain's not bad. I use this thing to solo most bosses when I'm feeling lazy and I don't want to pay attention to the boss. But it's not that fast. It's insanely high 1v1 Sustain, but it's not the best DPS. Now, without the offensive W spell, the one that shoots like a line of thorns on the ground, your DPS falls down to around 800, 900 at best. So yeah, that's a couple hundred DPS right there. Also, attunements didn't do anything worth mentioning, so you don't need to attune this weapon ever. So the Avian Bird's a little awkward to use because the W has a large charge up, which makes you actually lose DPS. It's great for nuking players, but not monsters. You just spam Q and weave in auto attack, so it blows everything up around it. And basically, when you run out of energy, you just swap back to human form and dump your AoEs, and then swap back to bird form, which you can indefinitely do. So it's good sustain, but it's good DPS, consistent DPS, but it has no sustain. Even with lifesteal, you don't really feel it that much. Yeah, you do more DPS technically in human forms, but those spells have cooldowns, so you're forced to kind of dance between the two, and it's just too much to keep up with. It's just a lot of micromanagement that I don't want to do. So the Prowler Staff is the cat staff, the Panther Staff. It's really good to stick to players, and it's also good for sneaking around in statics, but not much else. You can gank statics with it. As soon as you hear noises, just go into stealth, wait for someone to pass through you, and just jump them. and it's otherwise it's not that good of a weapon at all. It doesn't really have good AoE or anything. It's not a static soloing weapon at all. The Realmbreaker is a PvP weapon. I don't know why this is here. The DPS is really low. It's like half as good as the top weapons, bro. Like, just don't bring this into a static. I see people with this in a static. If you're in a group and you want to reduce the target's max HP, use one of the maces that shrinks the enemies down. Don't use this. Don't ever use this. The Earthsign Maulers are meant for solo content, not group content. The DPS is insanely low. It's even worse than Realmbreaker, actually. So I don't know why people bring this to groups, because they want to be like, you know, cool anime dude or something, but it's low DPS. It's like almost 3 times as weak as the top weapons, bro. Don't ever use this in a static or in a group dungeon. Alright, honorable mentions. Okay, like Hellfire Hands. You think that Hellfire Hands is cool because you can blow up players with it. It's not. It doesn't really hit enemies that much, and you can't really move them along with the boulder tosses. It's not a sustained DPS weapon. It doesn't heal you. It doesn't do much. It's not even a burst weapon in PvE. It just sucks. Don't use this. Don't bother using this. All right. The Spike Gauntlets are just a weaker version of Earthsign Maulers now. So yeah, they cast faster. The reason people use Spike Gauntlets is because it's great for soloing open world content, right? Because you can just grab a bunch of enemies and then you charge up in 0.6 seconds and they're all dead, because their HP totals are very low. Whereas in Nightfall Abbey, Mists, Camps, you need the Earthsign Maulers, who have a bit more HP. Earthsign Maulers hits for about 1,000 total more damage than this, but it takes 2 to 3 times as long until you see that effect happen. Whereas, let's see, what's some other weapons here? Okay, Hellfire Hands, we talked about that. The Daybreaker, you would think with a crit candle that it would outperform the Spirit Hunter, but that is incorrect. The Spirit Hunter is vastly superior because of the armor shred and the damage over time effect the E has. Whereas this Daybreaker E, yeah, it hits pretty hard, but against mobs, not really. It's just not worth it. The Claret Blade just pure sucks. It looks like it deals 2,000 damage with the E, but it's barely hitting wet noodle style on enemies. This thing does not clear groups or stacks very quickly. It's not good for someone like bosses. Swords just suck in general for PvE. The Bow of Badon does alright. It's okay, but there's just everything else does what it can do better. The only really fun and good thing about Bow of Badon, which I would bring one with me in a group dungeon, and the reason why is that the E-spell interrupts all the enemy's spells, so they just auto-attack you, which is nice. It's actually really nice, and it lets you stay in the fight a lot longer. But the damage just really isn't there. So there you have it. That's the video. If you clicked to the end of the video to figure out which one's the best weapon, too bad, I hit it in the middle. Haha. You gotta watch the video now. Anyway, that's it. Leave a like, leave a comment. You can subscribe, I guess. I'll see you later. On the right side of your screen is a video you should absolutely click. And if you don't click it, then you're going to go to the grocery store, and when you try to go to the produce section, the employees are going to tell you that they're busy loading stuff into it, and you can't enter the little cooler, which is, you know, sad day. And, you know, they're just going to be there chilling. They're not actually going to be doing their job, and like 30 minutes later, they're still there, still not letting anyone in. So you'll just have to not have any produce that day. I'll see you later. And if you order your food online, you just won't get produce. You're just going to open your bag, all right, and you won't have any produce. Or you go to fast food and you order sausage and they give you bacon instead. There you go. Sorry, it happens.